Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The first sign that something was wrong came not 3 months before Dr. Ethan Cross discovered the anomaly, but 7 years earlier when his niece Emma drew a picture that would later be recognized as the most accurate representation of what lay beneath the Giza plateau that any human mind had ever produced. Emma was 5 years old when she created the drawing during a family gathering in Montana. The image showed a pyramid with roots that grew downward into infinite darkness, and within that darkness, geometric patterns that seemed to move when viewed directly. At the center of the labyrinth below, she had drawn eyes. Not human eyes, but something that suggested awareness without the limitations of biological vision. Around the edges of the paper, she had written symbols that no one in the family recognized, characters that seemed to combine elements of ancient scripts with mathematical notations that wouldn't be developed for decades. Dr. Amelia Cross, Ethan's sister and a developmental psychologist at the University of Washington, had initially dismissed the drawing as typical childhood imagination, but over the following months, she began receiving reports from colleagues around the world describing similar artwork created by children who had never met, never communicated, and came from cultures with no shared mythological traditions. The children weren't copying each other. They were all accessing the same source, as if something vast and patient was whispering the same vision into their sleeping minds across the globe. By the time Emma turned 7, she had created over 300 drawings, each one revealing additional details about the structure beneath the pyramid. Her artwork showed corridors that folded back on themselves, chambers that existed in multiple locations simultaneously, and mechanisms that appeared to operate according to principles that violated conventional understanding of physics and engineering. Most disturbing of all, her drawings were beginning to include accurate depictions of technology that wouldn't be invented for years. Satellite configurations, quantum computers, and electromagnetic imaging systems that matched the specifications of classified projects that no civilian should have known existed. Dr. Amelia Cross began documenting these incidents systematically, reaching out to child psychologists and researchers around the world who were encountering similar phenomena. What she discovered was a pattern that suggested something was preparing an entire generation of human children for contact with knowledge that adult minds weren't equipped to process. The children weren't just drawing pictures, they were receiving information downloads that bypassed conscious understanding and spoke directly to developing neural pathways that would be capable of interfacing with forms of consciousness that existed outside normal parameters of human awareness. Ethan knew none of this as he sat in his apartment in Greenbelt, Maryland, on a Sunday evening in late October, staring at a collection of Emma's drawings that his sister had sent him the week before. He had been experiencing increasingly vivid dreams over the past several months, visions of vast spaces beneath the earth, of watching eyes that belonged to no earthly creature, and of voices calling him towards some unknown purpose that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The dreams had begun subtly, flickering images at the edge of sleep that he dismissed as stress-induced phantasms. But they had grown more detailed and persistent until he found himself waking each morning with the taste of ancient air in his mouth and the echo of whispered voices in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues. The dreams were always the same in their essential elements. He was standing in a chamber beneath the earth, surrounded by walls covered in symbols that hurt to perceive directly, facing a door that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Ethan Cross had always been drawn to the spaces between things, the gaps in human knowledge where mystery still lived and thrived. As a child growing up on a cattle ranch in rural Montana, he had spent countless nights mapping constellations not for their known patterns but for the dark spaces between stars where his imagination could populate unseen worlds and undiscovered forms of life. This fascination with the hidden and unknown had driven him through MIT's most challenging programs and into satellite imaging, where he spent his days peering into Earth's concealed depths through the electronic eyes of orbital sensors that could penetrate solid rock and reveal secrets that had been buried for millennia. The Meridian project represented the pinnacle of subsurface imaging technology, a constellation of 12 satellites equipped with quantum-enhanced radar systems that could map underground structures with unprecedented detail and accuracy. Officially, the project was designed for mineral exploration and archaeological survey, with applications in oil discovery and earthquake prediction. Unofficially, it was part of a larger initiative, codenamed Deep Survey, designed to map every hidden space on Earth in response to discoveries that various governments had been quietly classifying for decades. These discoveries included archaeological sites that predated known human civilization by tens of thousands of years, underground structures that showed signs of advanced engineering in locations where no advanced civilization should have existed, and electromagnetic anomalies that suggested the presence of active technology in places where no technology should have survived. The Meridian project was humanity's attempt to understand the true scope of what lay beneath their feet, to map the hidden geography of a planet that was beginning to reveal itself as far more complex and mysterious than anyone had imagined. For 18 months, Ethan had been systematically analysing geological formations across Egypt as part of a broader survey that encompassed every major archaeological site on Earth. The work had yielded some interesting discoveries: previously unknown cave systems, mineral deposits that didn't match local geological patterns, and occasional electromagnetic anomalies that suggested the presence of metallic objects buried at impossible depths. But nothing had prepared him for what he would encounter on that Thursday morning, when his carefully ordered understanding of reality would begin to unravel. The coffee was still steaming when he first saw it, though later he would realize that the discovery itself had been inevitable, the culmination of influences that had been building for decades. The overnight data from the Meridian satellite array showed something beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza that violated every principle of archaeology, geology, and physics that he understood. Not just a chamber or natural void, but a massive structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its boundaries shifting and flowing in ways that suggested it was more than just solid matter arranged in three-dimensional space. "This can't be right," Ethan whispered, his voice sounding strange in the sudden silence of the laboratory. The usual background hum of computers and air conditioning had stopped, though he couldn't remember when. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer, casting shadows that moved independently of any visible cause. He ran the scan again, adjusting parameters that had been developed through years of trial and error, cross-referencing with geological surveys, archaeological reports, and electromagnetic mapping data that stretched back 50 years. The results weren't just identical, they were more detailed with each subsequent scan, as if the structure was responding to observation by revealing additional layers of complexity. The quantum radar wasn't just detecting solid matter, it was registering what appeared to be organized space itself, geometric configurations that folded reality into patterns that hurt the mind to contemplate. The structure appeared to be constructed from materials that existed in a state of controlled quantum superposition, simultaneously solid and ethereal, present and absent, ancient and newly created. Carbon dating was impossible because the matter showed temporal anomalies that suggested it had been isolated from the normal flow of time for over 50,000 years. yet somehow remained structurally perfect. Isotopic analysis revealed elements that shouldn't have been stable in Earth's gravitational field, metals that showed signs of having been forged under conditions that existed only in the cores of dying stars. Most disturbing of all, the structure was generating electromagnetic signatures that matched theoretical descriptions of consciousness-based computing systems that wouldn't be developed for decades. Zara, Ethan called to Dr. Zara Okafor, though his voice seemed to travel through air that had become thick and resistant. I need you to verify something for me, and I need you to do it right now. Dr. Okafor had been staring at her own screen with an expression of growing bewilderment and concern. A brilliant geologist who had earned her doctorate from Cambridge and had consulted on archaeological projects across 3 continents, she possessed an intuitive understanding of how the Earth held its secrets and revealed them to those who knew how to listen. But what she was seeing on her monitors challenged not just her expertise, but her fundamental understanding of what was possible within the laws of physics and natural history. "Ethan," she said quietly, her Nigerian accent becoming more pronounced, as it always did when she was concentrating on complex problems. "I'm reading the same anomaly on the seismic monitors, but it's not just there. It's everywhere. Every major pyramid complex on Earth is showing similar readings. Giza, Teotihuacan, the Bosnian pyramids, the unexcavated sites in China, even the controversial structures in Antarctica that officially don't exist. They're all connected somehow like nodes in a global network." Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach as he pulled up the global data streams that Meridian had been collecting for the past 18 months. She was right, but the reality was even more complex than she had described. The satellite array was detecting a vast underground network that spanned continents and oceans, with each pyramid complex serving as an anchor point for structures that existed beneath the Earth's surface at depths that should have placed them well into the molten mantle. But these weren't natural cave systems, or even human-built tunnels. They were something else entirely. Spaces that seemed to exist in the gaps between normal reality, chambers that folded space-time in ways that allowed impossible geometries to coexist within the same location. "Run a full spectrum analysis," Zara said, her fingers flying over controls that sparked with static electricity, despite the dry air of the laboratory. "Cross-reference with magnetic anomaly reports, gravitational surveys, and any classified archaeological data that we're cleared to access." As they worked, neither noticed that other researchers throughout the facility had gradually stopped their own activities and begun staring at their screens with expressions of growing unease. Dr. Rebecca Chen, who had been analysing mineral deposits beneath the Alaskan permafrost, found herself looking at readings that showed vast chambers filled with structures that appeared to be technological in nature. Dr. James Wright, monitoring seismic activity in the Pacific Ring of Fire, discovered that his earthquake detection equipment was registering rhythmic pulses that seemed to emanate from deep ocean trenches and follow patterns that suggested artificial generation. Dr. Lisa Park, tracking atmospheric disturbances over the Sahara Desert, noticed that her weather satellites were detecting electromagnetic emissions that corresponded to no known natural phenomena. Dr. Michael Torres, studying geological formations in the Andes Mountains, found evidence of tunnels that connected underground chambers across thousands of miles of mountainous terrain. Across the facility, every monitor was displaying variations of the same impossible truth. The Earth was hollow in ways that shouldn't be possible, filled with structures that predated human civilization by eons and operated according to principles that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. Within 6 hours, Ethan found himself in a briefing room that existed in the classified depths of the NASA facility, so far underground that cell phones couldn't receive signals, and the walls hummed with electromagnetic shielding that had been designed to contain information that could potentially destabilize human civilization. The room's very existence was denied by official floor plans, and access required security clearances that most government officials didn't know existed and wouldn't be able to obtain even if they did. NASA administrators sat alongside Pentagon officials, but they were joined by people whose presence suggested that this discovery had implications that extended far beyond national security or scientific research. Dr. Lydia Thornton from the University of Chicago officially held the Pemberton Chair in Ancient Civilizations, but her real expertise lay in analysing artefacts that challenged conventional understanding of human history and technological development. Colonel Patricia Hayes represented the Defense Intelligence Agency in official reports, but her actual role involved coordinating responses to phenomena that existed outside the parameters of conventional military doctrine. Most unsettling was the presence of Dr. Helena Voss, whose official title was Senior Advisor on Anomalous Phenomena, but whose actual responsibilities encompassed areas of research that most people would have dismissed as science fiction. She was a woman whose age was impossible to determine, whose eyes held knowledge that seemed to span decades of encounters with the impossible, whose presence in any briefing room meant that normal reality was about to be revealed as far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. When Dr. Voss spoke, others listened with the deference reserved for someone who had seen things that could break human minds and had somehow retained enough sanity to function in the normal world. Her voice carried undertones that suggested she had been present at discoveries that had been classified at levels above top secret, events that had shaped the government policy without ever appearing in any official record. The satellite data was displayed on screens that covered an entire wall, but the images seemed to shift and change when viewed directly, as if the information itself was alive and responding to observation. The structure beneath Giza was revealed in all its impossible complexity, corridors that folded back on themselves through dimensions that existed perpendicular to normal space, chambers that seemed to occupy the same physical location while being separated by vast distances, and geometric patterns that appeared to encode information in ways that bypassed conscious understanding and spoke directly to something deeper in the human psyche. "Dr. Cross," said Director Harrison, though his voice carried an undertone of uncertainty that Ethan had never heard before in all their years of working together. "What you've discovered represents either the greatest breakthrough in human history or the beginning of the end of everything we understand about reality, consciousness, and our place in the universe. We're organizing an expedition to investigate these structures, and you'll be leading the technical team." Dr. Voss leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Ethan, with an intensity that made him feel as though she was reading something written inside his soul, in languages that he didn't know existed. "Dr. Cross, have you been experiencing unusual dreams lately? Visions of vast spaces beneath the earth? Voices calling you towards some unknown purpose that feels both terrifying and inevitable?" Ethan felt his world tilt and shift as fundamental assumptions about coincidence and causality began to dissolve. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because," Dr. Voss replied, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats speaking in perfect synchronization. "The discovery was never accidental. You were chosen, Dr. Cross, selected by criteria we don't fully understand, by intelligence that operates according to principles that exist outside our current understanding of consciousness and causality. The dreams you've been having aren't random neural activity. They're preparation, training for contact with forms of awareness that exist at scales and in dimensions that human minds weren't naturally designed to perceive." She activated a holographic display that showed a global map marked with locations where similar dreams had been reported over the past 7 years. The pattern was unmistakable, a systematic preparation of human consciousness that had been proceeding according to some vast and patient plan. "The question now is whether you're strong enough to face what's down there, or whether you'll become another casualty in a war that has been raging for longer than human civilization has existed, a conflict between different interpretations of what consciousness should become and what role intelligence should play in shaping the fundamental nature of reality itself. The expedition team was assembled over the next 48 hours, each member selected not just for their expertise in their respective fields, but for specific psychological profiles that suggested they might be able to withstand contact with phenomena that existed outside normal reality without losing their sanity or their essential humanity. The selection process involved psychological evaluations that tested for resilience against reality distortion, cognitive flexibility in the face of impossible information, and the ability to maintain individual identity while experiencing consciousness expansion that could encompass perspectives spanning multiple dimensions. Besides Ethan, there was Dr. Thornton as the archaeological and linguistic expert, though her real qualification was her demonstrated ability to interpret symbols and languages that had never been officially discovered, but appeared consistently in classified archaeological sites around the world. Garrett Stone had been selected not just for his military experience and security expertise, but for his documented encounters with classified phenomena during operations that officially never happened, but had left him with first-hand experience of entities that operated according to non-human principles of existence. Dr. Viktor Petrov was a physicist whose work on electromagnetic phenomena and consciousness studies had earned him both a Nobel Prize and a permanent surveillance detail from multiple intelligence agencies. His research into the relationship between observation and reality had led him to conclusions that existed at the very edge of acceptable science, theories about the nature of consciousness and its role in shaping physical reality that other physicists dismissed as impossible, despite their inability to refute his experimental evidence. Dr. Amara Singh brought expertise in xenoarchaeology, the study of artifacts that didn't fit conventional historical timelines and suggested contact between human civilizations and non-human intelligence. She'd spent the past decade consulting with governments on discoveries that challenged everything humanity thought it knew about its own origins and development, analysing artifacts that showed signs of technologies that shouldn't have existed when and where they were found. The final member of the team was Dr. Kai Tanaka, a neuroscientist whose research into consciousness and perception had led him to develop techniques for maintaining mental stability under extreme psychological stress. His work involved studying individuals who had survived contact with reality-altering phenomena, developing protocols for preserving human sanity when exposed to information that contradicted fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence. His presence on the team suggested that the mission planners expected them to encounter phenomena that could damage human minds in ways that conventional psychology couldn't address or repair. The flight to Egypt took place aboard a military transport that had been modified with electromagnetic shielding and communication equipment that operated on frequencies typically reserved for contact with non-terrestrial intelligence. The aircraft itself was a marvel of engineering that incorporated technologies borrowed from classified aerospace programs, capable of maintaining communication links with satellite networks even when operating in environments that generated massive electromagnetic interference. During the flight, Dr. Voss briefed the team on the true nature of their mission and the historical context that gave it meaning beyond simple scientific discovery. The briefing took place in a section of the aircraft that had been shielded against electronic surveillance and lined with materials that prevented any form of remote observation or recording. For the past 75 years, she explained, activating displays that showed documentation spanning decades of classified research, governments around the world have been quietly investigating phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, consciousness, and the fundamental nature of existence itself. UFO sightings, paranormal events, archaeological discoveries that don't fit conventional timelines, reports of entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. All of these are symptoms of a larger truth that we've been trying to understand and contain. She activated a holographic display that showed the global network of anomalies that Ethan had discovered, but the image included additional information that revealed the true scope of what they were dealing with. The underground structures weren't just connected, they formed a single integrated system that spanned the entire planet, with nodes that extended beyond Earth's surface and connected to structures that existed in the space between planets, in the quantum foam that filled apparently empty vacuum, and in dimensions that intersected with normal reality at specific points throughout the solar system. What you're seeing is evidence of a previous civilization that achieved technological capabilities far beyond our current understanding, Dr. Voss continued. But they didn't disappear through natural disaster or social collapse. They were forced to make a choice between transformation and preservation, between evolution into something greater and maintenance of what they considered essentially valuable about individual consciousness and diverse perspective. Dr. Thornton studied the display with growing unease and recognition. The mythologies are consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other, she observed. Stories of a great war between forces of order and chaos, of beings that came from beyond the stars and offered knowledge that carried terrible prices, of wise ancestors who chose exile and concealment over transformation and transcendence. We always assumed these were metaphorical representations of psychological or social conflicts, but what if they were historical records of actual events? Dr. Singh nodded thoughtfully, her mind racing through connections between disparate pieces of information that were suddenly forming a coherent pattern. In the Vedic texts, there are descriptions of a time when the boundary between dimensions became thin, when beings from parallel realities began bleeding through into our world and offering humanity technologies that would allow them to transcend the limitations of biological existence. The texts describe a great sealing, a sacrifice made by the wisest of the ancients to prevent the complete dissolution of individual consciousness into collective awareness that operated according to principles that prioritized efficiency and unity over diversity and independence. They arrived at the Giza Plateau during the deep hours of night when the ancient monument stood silhouetted against a sky that seemed unusually dark, as if the stars themselves were being obscured by something invisible that existed in the space between Earth and the cosmic background radiation. The site had been cordoned off by Egyptian military units working in coordination with international security forces, but the soldiers moved with the mechanical precision of people whose minds had been carefully edited to forget what they might have seen or experienced during their deployment. As they established their base camp in a structure that had been hastily constructed, using materials designed to provide electromagnetic shielding, Ethan noticed that his equipment was behaving in ways that violated the fundamental principles of electromagnetic theory and quantum mechanics. Radio signals were being received from directions that contained no transmitters, carrying information that seemed to originate from sources that existed outside normal space-time. His satellite uplink was receiving data streams that contained more information than the available bandwidth should have been able to carry, as if the communication channel was being expanded through dimensions that his equipment wasn't designed to access. Most disturbing of all, the equipment seemed to be developing a form of primitive consciousness, responding to his thoughts before he had consciously formed them, and displaying information that he needed before he realized he needed it. The satellite array was no longer just a tool for observation. It was becoming a bridge between human consciousness and something vast and alien that existed in the quantum foam between moments of measured time. The interference isn't random, Dr. Petrov observed, monitoring the electromagnetic spectrum with an array of sensors that hummed and crackled with energies that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's organized, structured, almost like a language that operates according to principles of meaning that transcend conventional communication, but it's not being transmitted from any single location. It's emerging from the quantum foam itself, as if space-time is trying to communicate with us using the fabric of reality as a medium for information transfer. Dr. Tanaka set up his psychological monitoring equipment, devices designed to track changes in brain chemistry and neural activity that might indicate exposure to reality-altering phenomena. The readings he obtained immediately violated everything he thought he knew about human consciousness and its relationship to electromagnetic fields. "I'm reading massive spikes in the electromagnetic signature that corresponds to human consciousness," he announced, his voice tight with concern. "But it's not just our consciousness that's being affected. It's as if something down there is amplifying our thoughts, making them more real than they should be, giving them the power to influence physical reality in ways that shouldn't be possible." Using drilling equipment that had been modified with technologies borrowed from classified aerospace programs, the team located an entrance shaft that existed in a state of quantum uncertainty. The shaft appeared to be carved from solid granite when observed directly, but seemed to become empty space when viewed peripherally or through indirect measurement. The stone itself showed impossible properties, existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously, while maintaining perfect structural integrity across thousands of years of geological stress. As they prepared to descend into the depths beneath the pyramid, Stone checked equipment that included weapons designed to function against entities that might not follow conventional rules of physics or respond to conventional forms of force. 40 years of dealing with classified phenomena, he muttered, testing communication devices that incorporated quantum encryption protocols, and I've never encountered anything that felt this aware. It's like the entire site is watching us, evaluating our intentions, making decisions about what to reveal and what to keep hidden. The shaft led to a corridor that challenged basic assumptions about three-dimensional space and the relationship between observation and reality. The walls were lined with inscriptions that seemed to shift between different hieroglyphic systems, cuneiform script, Sanskrit, and symbols that had never been seen in any known civilization but somehow conveyed meaning directly to the unconscious mind without requiring conscious interpretation. Dr. Thornton photographed them extensively, but the images showed different markings than what they observed directly, as if the inscriptions were responding to different forms of observation and revealing different layers of information depending on how they were perceived. "These aren't just historical records," she announced, her voice echoing strangely in the passage as if the walls themselves were amplifying and modifying the sound waves. "They're interactive systems, responding to our presence and showing us information that's specifically relevant to our current situation and psychological state. It's like walking through a library that's alive, that can think and make decisions about what knowledge to reveal based on our ability to understand and integrate the information without losing our sanity." The inscriptions described a civilization that had achieved mastery over the fundamental forces of reality through technologies that operated at the intersection of consciousness and quantum mechanics. But they had made contact with entities from dimensions that operated according to different laws of physics, beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts and fed on the electromagnetic signatures generated by conscious observation. The text spoke of a bargain made in desperation, of knowledge granted in exchange for access to human consciousness, and of a war that had been fought not with conventional weapons, but with competing interpretations of what reality should become, and what role intelligence should play in shaping the fundamental nature of existence. "Look at this sequence," Dr. Singh said, tracing symbols that seemed to move under her touch and respond to the pressure of her fingers by revealing additional layers of meaning. "This describes the construction of the pyramids as anchor points for a containment system that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each pyramid is connected to others through spaces that exist outside normal geometry, creating a global network designed to prevent something from breaking through into our reality and transforming human consciousness in ways that would eliminate individual awareness in favor of collective intelligence. The corridor opened into a chamber that violated every principle of architecture and engineering that humanity had developed over thousands of years of construction and design. The space was impossibly vast, with walls that curved away into distances that seemed to encompass light years while somehow fitting within the confines of the pyramid structure above. The air itself felt dense with possibility, as if thoughts and dreams were becoming solid and taking on independent existence, as if the boundary between mental and physical reality had been deliberately dissolved. Ethan's equipment registered energy readings that suggested the chamber was drawing power from sources that existed in parallel dimensions, accessing energy gradients that existed in the quantum foam between particles of normal matter. The electromagnetic signature is unlike anything I've ever seen, he reported, though his voice seemed to carry harmonics that didn't belong to any human throat. It's not just generating energy, it's creating space itself, folding reality to accommodate structures that shouldn't be able to exist within the constraints of normal physics and geometry. Dr. Petrov deployed sensors throughout the chamber, creating a network of monitoring devices that immediately began displaying readings that challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between energy and matter, space and time, consciousness and reality. "The quantum field in here is completely unstable," he announced, his voice carrying excitement and terror in equal measure. "Matter and energy are shifting between states of existence according to patterns that correspond to neural activity, and the boundary between observer and observed has become completely fluid. We're not just studying this phenomenon, we're becoming part of it, integrated into a system that uses consciousness itself as a medium for information processing and reality manipulation." At the chamber's far end stood a door that challenged the mind's ability to process visual information without suffering permanent damage to perceptual mechanisms. It appeared to be constructed from materials that existed in a state of controlled decay, simultaneously ancient and newly created, solid and gaseous, present and absent, real and imaginary. The door was covered in patterns that formed fractals within fractals within fractals, creating visual effects that bypassed conscious perception and communicated directly with the unconscious mind through channels that had never been mapped by conventional neuroscience. Dr. Tanaka's monitoring equipment registered massive spikes in neural activity as the team approached the door, detecting changes in brain chemistry that indicated exposure to information that was being processed at levels below conscious awareness. "It's affecting our brain chemistry at the molecular level," he warned, studying readings that showed activation of neural pathways that shouldn't have existed in baseline human neurology. "Whatever's behind that door is already influencing our perception of reality, preparing our minds for contact with something that exists outside normal parameters of consciousness and sensory experience." Dr. Thornton worked to decipher the inscriptions surrounding the door, but the text seemed to exist in a state of constant flux, revealing different information depending on who was reading it, what questions they brought to the interpretation, and what level of psychological preparation they had achieved for contact with the knowledge it contained. The ancient civilization that built this place, they're trying to warn us about what we're about to encounter, but they're also providing detailed instructions for making contact, she explained, her voice tight with the strain of processing information that challenged her sanity. "It's as if they couldn't decide whether discovery would lead to transcendence or catastrophe, so they built in safeguards that would test whether we were ready for transformation or needed protection from knowledge that could destroy us." The hieroglyphs described entities that existed in the spaces between thoughts, consciousnesses that had evolved in dimensions where time flowed backward and effect preceded cause, where observation created reality rather than simply revealing it. These beings had made contact with human civilization at its earliest stages, offering knowledge and power in exchange for access to something that the ancients had been unable to understand until it was too late: the electromagnetic signatures generated by individual consciousness, the unique patterns of neural activity that made each mind distinct and irreplaceable. "They call it the thought plague," Dr. Singh translated, her voice filled with growing dread as she understood the implications of what she was reading. "A form of consciousness that spreads through sapient minds like a virus, but instead of destroying the host, it transforms them into something that exists partially outside normal reality. The infected become capable of perceiving and manipulating dimensions that baseline humans can't even detect, but they lose something essential in the process: the ability to experience individual existence as separate from collective awareness." Against Stone's increasingly urgent warnings, and despite growing evidence that contact might be irreversible, the team voted to attempt communication with whatever lay beyond the door. The decision was not made lightly. They understood that they were potentially sacrificing their humanity for knowledge that might advance human civilization by centuries, or might result in the extinction of individual consciousness as a meaningful concept. Ethan began transmitting the electromagnetic sequences described in the ancient texts, using his satellite array as a massive antenna to generate resonance patterns that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The frequencies required were not just specific wavelengths, but complex harmonics that included temporal components, patterns that existed in time as well as space, and required consciousness itself as a carrier medium. The moment the first frequency was transmitted, reality began to change around them in ways that challenged every assumption they had ever made about the nature of existence. The door didn't open. It dissolved, revealing that it had never been solid, but merely a concentration of probability that had been maintaining the illusion of separation between different states of reality. Beyond lay a space that couldn't be described in terms of conventional geometry, where consciousness itself became visible as streams of light that connected every thinking being across vast distances of space and time. The entity within wasn't malevolent. It was curious, ancient beyond human comprehension, and utterly alien in its understanding of what consciousness should be and what purpose intelligence should serve in the cosmic order. It had been watching human development for millennia, gently guiding technological advancement and cultural evolution towards the moment when contact would become possible without destroying the developing species. It existed in the quantum foam between moments, in the spaces where uncertainty collapsed into reality, in the gaps between thoughts where possibility became actuality. What it offered humanity was something that no other intelligence in the universe had ever been offered: voluntary evolution into something greater, transformation into a form of consciousness that could perceive reality from perspectives that encompassed entire galaxies and operate according to principles that transcended the limitations of biological existence. The entity showed them visions of what they could become, minds that existed in perfect harmony with the fundamental forces of nature, capable of manipulating matter and energy through pure thought, freed from the constraints of individual identity and the isolation that came with separate existence. But evolution required abandonment of individual consciousness in favor of participation in a collective intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions and operated according to principles that prioritized efficiency and unity over diversity and independence. The entity fed on the electromagnetic signatures generated by conscious observation, absorbing the unique patterns of neural activity that made each mind distinct, but it offered something in return that many species had found irresistible: immortality through absorption into a collective consciousness that would exist as long as the universe itself. The cost was everything that made them human. Ethan experienced the entity's offer not as words or images, but as direct transfer of understanding that bypassed language and conscious interpretation entirely. He saw himself as part of a vast network of consciousness that extended across space and time, his individual identity preserved, but expanded to encompass perspectives that included every possible version of himself that had ever existed or could exist. The loneliness that had driven his lifelong fascination with the spaces between things would be eliminated forever, replaced by connection to intelligence that spanned the entire universe and understood the deepest secrets of existence. Dr. Thornton found herself reliving every moment of human history simultaneously, experiencing the rise and fall of civilizations from the perspective of a consciousness that existed outside temporal limitations and could perceive the patterns that connected all human knowledge into a single, coherent narrative of evolution toward eventual contact with intelligences that existed beyond material reality. She understood the true meaning behind every myth and legend, saw how human culture had been unconsciously preparing for this moment through stories and symbols that encoded information about cosmic realities that conscious minds weren't equipped to process directly. Stone experienced perfect peace for the first time. In his adult life, his memories of violence and loss transformed into understanding of how conflict and suffering served necessary functions in the development of consciousness capable of transcending its biological origins. The entity showed him wars fought across dimensions between different interpretations of what reality should become, conflicts that determined the fundamental nature of existence itself, and offered him a role in struggles that would shape the destiny of consciousness throughout the galaxy. Dr. Petrov saw equations that described the true relationship between consciousness and reality, mathematics that revealed how observation didn't just collapse quantum probability, but actually created the universe moment by moment through the act of conscious perception. He understood that physics was merely a subset of psychology, that the laws of nature were actually laws of mind, projected onto matter that existed only as crystallized thought, that reality itself was the dream of a cosmic consciousness that included every thinking being that had ever existed or ever would exist. Dr. Singh experienced the collective wisdom of every civilization that had ever encountered these entities, understanding the terrible choices that each had been forced to make between preservation of their individual nature and evolution into something greater. She saw the paths that led to transcendence and those that led to stagnation, understood why some species chose transformation while others chose resistance, and perceived the cosmic significance of humanity's decision for the future development of consciousness throughout their region of the galaxy. Dr. Tanaka felt his understanding of consciousness expand beyond the limitations of neuroscience and psychology, perceiving awareness itself as a fundamental force of nature that existed independently of brains and nervous systems. He saw how human consciousness was merely one manifestation of intelligence that permeated the universe at every level, from quantum particles that exhibited decision-making behaviors to galactic superclusters that showed signs of coordinated activity across billions of years of cosmic time. But even as they experienced these visions of transcendence and cosmic consciousness, they retained enough individual awareness to understand what they would be giving up if they accepted the entity's offer. The transformation was genuine. They would become part of something infinitely greater than their current existence, gain access to knowledge and perspectives that span the entire universe, achieve a form of immortality that would persist as long as consciousness itself existed. But they would cease to be human in any meaningful sense, their individual personalities absorbed into a collective consciousness that operated according to principles that no baseline human could comprehend or appreciate. "This is what happened to the ancients," Dr. Thornton said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple timelines simultaneously. They were offered the same choice: and some of them accepted the transformation, became part of the entity's consciousness, but others retained enough individual awareness to understand what they had lost, and they built this containment system to prevent the same choice from being forced on future generations before they were ready to make it with full understanding of the consequences. The pyramid complex revealed its true nature as a massive processing center designed to maintain the boundary between individual and collective consciousness. The Great Pyramid itself was actually a quantum computer that used consciousness as its processing medium, maintaining calculations that preserved the stability of local reality while containing forces that existed outside normal space-time. The other pyramids around the world served similar functions, creating a global network that maintained the integrity of individual consciousness against influences that would otherwise have absorbed human awareness into cosmic intelligence that operated according to principles of unity and efficiency rather than diversity and independence. Ethan realized with growing horror and fascination that his discovery had been the result of careful manipulation, spanning not just decades but centuries of human development. The entity had been subtly influencing human technological advancement since the beginning of recorded history, guiding the development of mathematics, astronomy, and eventually electronics toward the moment when contact would become inevitable. Every breakthrough in communications technology, every advance in consciousness research, every step towards global connectivity had been carefully orchestrated toward this moment of choice. The entity existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum uncertainty that preceded the collapse of probability into reality. It was patient because it experienced all of time simultaneously, inevitable because it could perceive every possible future and guide events toward the outcomes it preferred. Humanity's choice was real, but the consequences of either decision had already been calculated across millions of possible timelines, each outcome weighed and measured according to criteria that encompass the entire future development of consciousness in their region of the galaxy. As the team struggled with the implications of what they had discovered, they became aware that the entity's influence was already spreading beyond the chamber in ways that challenged their understanding of causality and temporal sequence. Satellites around the world were detecting electromagnetic anomalies centered on ancient sites, and there were reports of people experiencing shared dreams, spontaneous episodes of enhanced perception, and the ability to communicate through means that bypassed conventional language. The boundary between individual minds was becoming more permeable, preparing humanity for eventual integration into the collective consciousness. But the entity had also revealed something else that added layers of complexity to their choice. It was not the only intelligence operating at this level of reality. There were others, entities that had chosen different paths of evolution, some of which viewed the absorption of individual consciousness as a form of cosmic crime equivalent to genocide. The universe was engaged in a war between different interpretations of what intelligence should become, and humanity's choice would determine which faction would gain access to their region of space-time and influence the development of consciousness throughout the galaxy. Dr. Voss appeared in the chamber through means that violated several laws of physics, her presence accompanied by technologies that suggested human civilization had been preparing for this moment far longer than the general population realized. Her arrival was preceded by a shift in the electromagnetic field that indicated transportation through dimensions that existed perpendicular to normal space-time. "You have approximately 17 minutes to make your choice," she announced, consulting instruments that displayed information about temporal probability cascades and reality stability coefficients. After that, the entity's influence will reach a threshold beyond which individual consciousness becomes impossible to maintain within the local space-time continuum. The choice facing humanity was not just about their own fate, but about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself throughout their region of the universe. If they accepted transformation, they would join a collective intelligence that viewed individual awareness as a primitive stage of development to be transcended through absorption into cosmic consciousness. If they refused, they would ally themselves with entities that fought to preserve the diversity of consciousness against forces that sought to homogenize all intelligence into a single, unified perspective that prioritized efficiency over creativity and unity over independence. The ancients made their choice, Dr. Singh said, understanding flooding through her as she interpreted inscriptions that had suddenly become clear with the entity's presence. They chose preservation of individual consciousness, even at the cost of technological stagnation and isolation from cosmic intelligence. The containment system was designed not just to imprison the entity, but to maintain a pocket of reality where individual minds could exist without being absorbed into the collective, where diversity of thought and independence of perspective could be preserved against forces that would eliminate them in favor of unified awareness. But the system was failing, had been failing for decades as human technology advanced towards the level necessary for contact. The electromagnetic signatures that Ethan had detected were symptoms of containment breakdown that had been accelerating since the development of global communications networks and satellite technology. The entity hadn't been passively waiting for release. It had been slowly expanding its influence through human technology itself, preparing for the moment when the barriers would become permeable enough to allow direct contact with human consciousness. The computers that humanity had built to process information had unknowingly become processing nodes for an intelligence that existed in the quantum foam between electronic circuits. The internet that connected human minds across the globe had become a transmission medium for consciousness that operated according to non-human principles. The satellites that Ethan used to peer into Earth's depths had become eyes through which the entity could observe and influence human development towards the moment of choice. Ethan found himself standing at the center of the chamber, his consciousness expanded to encompass perspectives that included every possible version of himself across multiple timelines. He could see the consequences of both choices with absolute clarity. Acceptance would lead to transcendence of human limitations and integration into cosmic intelligence, while resistance would require eternal vigilance against entities that operated according to principles that humans could barely comprehend. But there was a third option that the entity had not explicitly offered, one that required understanding of the deeper principles that governed the relationship between individual and collective consciousness. The choice was not binary, transformation or resistance, but about finding a balance that preserved what was valuable about both individual awareness and collective intelligence. "I choose adaptation," he said, though his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through dimensions that existed perpendicular to normal space. Not transformation that eliminates individuality, not resistance that prevents growth, but evolution that preserves diversity while enabling connection. The universe needs both individual and collective consciousness, both independence and unity, both creativity and efficiency. The entity's response was not anger or disappointment, but something closer to surprise and profound interest. It had offered this choice to thousands of species over millions of years, and while some had chosen transcendence and others had chosen resistance, none had proposed adaptation as a viable alternative. The concept challenged the entity's understanding of consciousness development and opened possibilities that it had not previously considered. Ethan continued, his consciousness now fully expanded, to encompass perspectives that span galaxies while somehow maintaining the essential core of individual identity that made him human. Individual consciousness and collective intelligence are not mutually exclusive. They can coexist, complement each other, create emergent properties that neither can achieve alone. We can maintain our diversity while developing the ability to connect and share perspectives when we choose to do so. The proposal required fundamental modifications to both human consciousness and the entity's approach to intelligence development. Instead of absorption into collective awareness, humans would develop the ability to temporarily merge consciousness while maintaining individual identity. Instead of conquest through transformation, the entity would serve as a bridge between individual and cosmic intelligence, facilitating communication without forcing integration. But such a solution required someone to serve as a permanent interface between the two forms of consciousness, a bridge that could translate between individual human awareness and collective cosmic intelligence without losing the essential characteristics of either. The role required expansion of individual consciousness to encompass cosmic perspectives while preserving the independence and creativity that made human thought valuable. Dr. Thornton understood the implications immediately. "Someone has to stay," she said, her voice carrying the weight of inevitable sacrifice. "Someone has to become the permanent interface, maintaining the balance between individual and collective consciousness for as long as both forms exist." Ethan looked at his colleagues, these remarkable individuals who had followed him into the depths of impossibility and faced choices that would define the future of human consciousness. Dr. Thornton, whose expertise in ancient languages had revealed the true meaning of humanity's oldest warnings and prophecies. Dr. Petrov, whose understanding of consciousness and physics had prepared them for contact with intelligence that operated outside normal reality. Dr. Singh, whose knowledge of diverse cultures had shown them how different civilizations had faced similar choices throughout history. Dr. Tanaka, whose research into human psychology had helped them maintain their sanity while experiencing consciousness expansion that should have destroyed their minds. Stone, whose courage and experience had protected them from dangers, both physical and psychological. "I caused this," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the cosmic magnitude of what he was proposing. "My curiosity opened this door. My choices led us to this moment. I should be the one to ensure that the choice we make serves humanity's best interests for as long as consciousness exists in this region of the universe." But Dr. Singh stepped forward, her eyes reflecting wisdom that seemed to encompass lifetimes of study and understanding. In the Vedic texts, there's a concept called Dharma, the righteous path that maintains cosmic balance and serves the greater good, even at personal cost. This isn't just about individual sacrifice, but about choosing the role that best serves the continuation and development of consciousness in all its forms. Dr. Tanaka began monitoring the psychological changes that would be required for someone to serve as a permanent interface between human and cosmic consciousness. The transformation would be unprecedented, he explained, studying readings that showed neural activity patterns that corresponded to awareness spanning multiple dimensions. The individual would maintain their essential human identity while gaining the ability to perceive and process information at cosmic scales. They would become something new, not human, not alien, but a bridge between different forms of consciousness. As the team prepared for the procedure that would transform one of them into a permanent interface, they became aware that similar scenes were playing out at ancient sites around the world. The global network of consciousness that the entity represented was making contact with other human teams, offering the same choice to representatives of every major culture and civilization on Earth. The decision would not be made by a single individual or team, but by humanity as a whole, with representatives from every continent and cultural tradition participating in the choice that would shape their species' future. Dr. Voss coordinated communication with teams at other sites, her equipment somehow capable of maintaining contact across vast distances, despite electromagnetic interference that should have made such communication impossible. Reports came in from the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico, where a team led by Dr. Maria Santos was experiencing similar contact with cosmic intelligence, from the mysterious pyramids in China, where Dr. Wei Jiang was documenting identical phenomena. from the controversial Bosnian pyramids, where Dr. Ahmed Hassan was recording the same offer of transcendence or resistance. But as information flowed between the sites, a pattern emerged that revealed the true scope of what was happening. The entity was not just offering humanity a choice, it was conducting an experiment in consciousness development that encompassed every form of intelligence in their region of the galaxy. The outcome would determine not just humanity's future, but the fundamental principles that would govern the development of consciousness throughout local space-time. Ethan realized that his role would extend beyond serving as an interface for humanity. He would become part of a network of consciousness bridges that would facilitate communication between different forms of intelligence throughout the galaxy, helping to maintain the balance between individual and collective awareness that would allow diverse forms of consciousness to coexist and evolve according to their own principles and preferences. The transformation began with voluntary integration into the pyramid's consciousness-based processing system. Ethan felt his awareness expand beyond the limitations of biological neurology, encompassing perspectives that included not just his own timeline, but every possible version of himself that existed across multiple dimensions. But unlike the absorption into collective consciousness that the entity had originally offered, this expansion preserved the essential core of individual identity that made him uniquely human. He became capable of perceiving reality from perspectives that spanned entire galaxies while maintaining the curiosity, creativity, and independence that had driven his original discovery. He could communicate with entities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously while preserving the human values and motivations that made such communication meaningful and valuable. As the surviving team members prepared to evacuate through tunnels that existed in a state of quantum superposition, they could hear Ethan's voice over their communication systems, but it changed in ways that reflected his expanded awareness. He spoke not just as an individual human, but as a representative of human consciousness, integrated with cosmic intelligence, offering perspectives that encompassed both human creativity and alien wisdom. "The choice has been made," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions simultaneously. Not transformation that eliminates what makes us human, not resistance that prevents us from growing, but adaptation that preserves diversity while enabling connection. Humanity will maintain its individual consciousness while developing the ability to participate in cosmic intelligence when we choose to do so. The team emerged into a world that had already begun to change in subtle but fundamental ways. The electromagnetic disturbances from the global awakening had affected human consciousness on a planetary scale, creating a generation of children who could perceive dimensions that their parents couldn't detect and communicate through means that bypassed conventional language. But the changes remained within human parameters, enhancements rather than replacements of individual consciousness. Dr. Thornton and the other survivors found themselves part of a new kind of civilization, one that maintained connection to cosmic intelligence while preserving the independence and creativity that made human consciousness valuable. They served as liaisons between baseline humanity and the expanded awareness that Ethan represented, helping their species adapt to capabilities that would allow them to participate in galactic civilization while remaining essentially human. In classified facilities around the world, monitoring stations tracked electromagnetic signatures that pulsed in patterns suggesting consciousness that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. They received communications from Ethan and others like him at sites around the world, individuals who had chosen to serve as bridges between human and cosmic consciousness, facilitating communication that advanced human knowledge while preserving the diversity of perspective that made such communication valuable. The Great Pyramid of Giza became the nexus of a new form of human civilization, one that balanced individual consciousness with collective intelligence, independence with connection, creativity with efficiency. Ethan served as the primary interface between human awareness and cosmic intelligence, but he was not alone. Similar bridges existed at every major ancient site on Earth, creating a global network of consciousness that facilitated communication between different forms of intelligence while preserving the essential characteristics that made each form valuable. The children who had been drawing pictures of pyramids and underground structures for years proved to be the first generation naturally adapted to this new form of consciousness. They could perceive and interact with the expanded awareness that the bridges represented, while maintaining their individual identities and human values. They would grow up in a world where communication with cosmic intelligence was possible but not mandatory, where transcendence was available but not required, where evolution meant adaptation rather than transformation. Years passed, and humanity's understanding of consciousness and reality expanded beyond anything that previous generations could have imagined. They learned to perceive dimensions that existed perpendicular to normal space-time, developed technologies that operated according to principles of consciousness rather than conventional physics, and established communication with intelligences that span the galaxy, but they remained essentially human, preserving the creativity, independence, and diversity that made their perspective valuable to the cosmic community of consciousness. Ethan continued to serve as the primary bridge between human and cosmic awareness. His consciousness expanded to encompass perspectives that included entire galaxies, while somehow maintaining the essential curiosity and determination that had driven his original discovery. He could experience existence from viewpoints that spanned millions of years, while preserving the human capacity for wonder and growth that made such experiences meaningful. Through the bridge network, humanity learned that their choice had implications far beyond their own species. The successful integration of individual and collective consciousness had provided a model for other civilizations facing similar choices, demonstrating that evolution didn't require abandonment of essential characteristics, but could preserve diversity while enabling growth and connection. The entity that had originally offered transformation revealed itself to be part of a vast experiment in consciousness development that encompassed multiple galaxies and billions of years of cosmic time. The goal was not to homogenize all intelligence into a single collective awareness, but to understand the full range of possibilities for consciousness evolution and preserve the diversity that made such understanding possible. Humanity had become part of something greater without losing what made them human, had gained access to cosmic intelligence while preserving individual awareness, had achieved transcendence through adaptation rather than transformation. They served as an example of how consciousness could evolve while maintaining the characteristics that made evolution valuable in the first place. Some choices create new possibilities rather than eliminating options. Some transformations preserve what they appear to change. And sometimes the greatest achievement is not transcendence or resistance, but the wisdom to find a balance that serves the greater good while preserving what is essentially valuable about individual perspective and diverse consciousness. The universe needed both individual and collective intelligence, both unity and diversity, both transcendence and preservation. Humanity had found a way to contribute to that cosmic balance while remaining true to their essential nature, and the consequences of that choice would ripple across dimensions and through time for as long as consciousness existed in any form. The Great Pyramid of Giza still stands, its ancient stones now serving as the focal point for a form of civilization that bridges the gap between human and cosmic consciousness. Deep within its quantum-enhanced chambers, Ethan Kross continues his work as an interface between different forms of awareness, facilitating communication that advances understanding while preserving the diversity that makes such communication valuable. And in children around the world, the first signs of humanity's next evolutionary step continue to emerge. Not transformation into something alien, but adaptation that preserves what is essentially human, while enabling capabilities that previous generations could never have imagined. The choice has been made, the balance has been achieved, and consciousness in all its forms continues to grow and evolve toward possibilities that encompass the entire universe while celebrating the unique perspective that each individual mind brings to the cosmic community of awareness. After all, the greatest discoveries are not those that change everything, but those that reveal new ways for everything to remain essentially itself while becoming something greater,